In the early 1960s, the Cold War was not an abstract rivalry discussed only in speeches and headlines. It was a constant psychological pressure shaping decisions at the highest levels of power. Nuclear weapons were deployed, intelligence failures were fresh in memory, and fear had become a driving force in strategic thinking. It was within this climate that one of the most disturbing plans in modern American history was created. Not by enemies, but from within the system itself. The plan was real, documented, and approved by senior military leadership. It was called Operation Northwoods. The United States was still processing the shock of the Bay of Pigs invasion. What was meant to be a swift and covert operation against Fidel Castro had ended in public failure and international embarrassment. Cuba, now aligned with the Soviet Union, stood less than 100 miles from Florida. For military planners, this proximity felt intolerable. The pressure to act was immense, and patience was running thin. Some leaders began to believe that removing Castro was not just a strategic goal, but an urgent necessity. Operation Northwoods proposed a solution to a problem that had stalled American action: public support. The plan argued that if the United States could not justify war through Cuban aggression, it could create the appearance of that aggression itself. The documents outlined scenarios in which violent acts would be staged against American targets and blamed on Cuba. These included bombings, sabotage, fabricated evidence, and even the manipulation of civilian casualties to provoke national outrage. The objective was clear: generate fear and anger strong enough to unify the country behind military intervention. What makes Operation Northwoods especially troubling is the logic behind it. Civilian lives were treated as instruments. Truth was considered optional. The public was viewed not as a body to be informed, but as an audience to be manipulated. Every proposal relied on the assumption that emotional shock would override scrutiny. Fear would replace consent. In this framework, moral boundaries were no longer protections, they were inconveniences. Yet the plan never left the page. In 1962, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara rejected Operation Northwoods outright and brought it to President John F. Kennedy. Kennedy refused to authorize it in any form. The proposal was shelved, and the general most closely associated with it was reassigned. No false attacks occurred. No fabricated tragedies were staged. A line that had nearly disappeared was restored. This decision mattered. It reinforced civilian control over the military and affirmed that even during extreme tension, the United States would not define itself through deception and self-inflicted terror. Kennedy understood that a nation willing to betray its own people in the name of security would ultimately destroy the legitimacy it sought to protect. For decades, the existence of Operation Northwoods remained classified. It was only in the 1990s, through declassified government documents, that the public learned how close the country had come to manufacturing its own justification for war. The revelation was unsettling precisely because it was real. Signed, approved, and abandoned. Operation Northwoods is remembered not because it happened, but because it did not. It stands as a warning about how fear can distort judgment, even within democratic systems. But it is also a reminder of something essential. The same system that allowed such a plan to be conceived also allowed it to be stopped. Accountability prevailed where secrecy nearly dominated. This was history went wrong. Not because America crossed the line, but because it came close enough to see why that line matters.